I agreed to an open relationship only because it was something my girlfriend really wanted. I hoped it would help keep us together and make her happier, but things didn't go as planned. Over time, she couldn't handle the emotions and jealousy. In the end, that decision not only destroyed our relationship, but also her own life. I was sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m. when Kate quietly opened the front door. She was wearing a short black dress I had never seen before. She slipped off her heels, walked past me without a glance, and disappeared into the bathroom. I just sat there in the dark thinking, I agreed to this. I said yes to all of it. I'm 31. Kate is 28. We've been together for almost 8 years. We met at a friend's party, me already working full time, her just starting to break away from her parents' grip. Her mom was strict, borderline controlling. Every aspect of Kate's personal life was under surveillance. She lived by rules someone else wrote for her, and somewhere along the way, I became the first person she could be herself with. When we moved in together, everything felt simple. Shared plans, late-night conversations, spontaneous road trips. She used to call us a team. We worked, saved money, picked out furniture from clearance sales, laughed at the same dumb memes over and over. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then about 6 months ago, something cracked in her. She started saying she hadn't lived enough, hadn't tried things, hadn't had the kind of freedom other people had. And then she brought up the idea of an open relationship. At first it was just hints, then full-on conversations. I pushed back. It felt unnatural to me. But she insisted, said it wasn't about betrayal, but experience, growth, honesty. I didn't want to lose her. I saw how restless she was, how much she needed to feel like she wasn't trapped. I thought if I really loved her, I should let her go explore what she missed out on, that it would prove I wasn't some kind of cage. So I downloaded a dating app, went on one date, and that was it. The whole thing felt forced. The woman was nice, but I kept comparing her to Kate. I didn't want something new. I wanted what we had. I wanted Kate. My experiment ended before it started. Kate's went differently. She met a guy at work. They started texting all the time, going out after hours, disappearing on weekends. I tried to stay calm, to not ask questions, to be mature. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that she'd come back from it stronger. But when she started coming home closer to sunrise, I didn't recognize her anymore. Most nights I was alone. We barely talked. She'd scroll through her phone, laugh at something, shower, go to bed. I sat in the dark. We didn't fight. I just stopped existing. Became part of the furniture, a background presence that didn't matter. At some point I realized I had agreed to something I wasn't built for. I had become her base, safe, stable, predictable, but I wasn't really part of her life anymore. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt completely alone in this relationship. A few weeks after that night, I started realizing something. Whatever connection Kate and I had was fading. We lived under the same roof, but only crossed paths by accident. I'd leave early in the morning. She was still asleep. I'd come back late. She was already gone. Sometimes we'd pass each other in the kitchen, exchange a few words, and that was it. She didn't ask about my day anymore, and I stopped asking about hers. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew there'd be no answer. I tried to rationalize everything, told myself Kate was just going through something, that this was part of the process and I had to give her space. I read articles, watched videos about open relationships, tried convincing myself that jealousy wasn't a reason to blow everything up. But deep down there was this strange exhaustion, not physical, something deeper, like I was carrying a weight that wasn't mine. She started spending more time at her new guy's place, said it was just easier, that she hated being alone while I was at work. I wanted to push back, to say I was lonely too. But every time I opened my mouth, she shut the conversation down, shrinking into herself, saying, "Don't pressure me," and disappearing into her room. Yeah, we had separate rooms now. The bedroom stopped being ours. She'd go in, close the door, and I'd stay out on the couch with my laptop, some show in the background, and silence. Trying to cope, I reactivated my dating profile. A few matches, one date, same result. The people were nice, open, interesting, but inside something just clenched. I didn't want anything new. I wanted what we used to have. Our Saturday morning breakfasts, her ridiculous dances to detergent commercials, her habit of reading me the dumbest articles she found online. I felt abandoned, even though technically no one had left anyone. And the worst part? I had agreed to all of this. I had no one to blame but myself. I created this situation where I became optional. At some point, I realized I couldn't even focus at work. I'd stare at the screen, reading emails without taking in a single word. My mind was always elsewhere. Back at home, behind her closed door, in the weekends she spent with someone else. I felt smeared out, like I existed but wasn't really there. Everything was muted and unbearable. One day I called an old friend, someone I hadn't seen in years but had once been close to. I just said, "I need to talk." We met at a cafe near my office. I tried to be calm, not complain, but by the end, everything came spilling out. She listened and then quietly said, Alex, who's going to pull you out when you fall apart? I didn't have an answer because I knew the truth. No one. I'd been carrying someone else's pain, someone else's freedom, someone else's chaos for too long. I thought love meant support, no matter what. But it turns out that road goes nowhere if you're the only one walking. The moment I left that cafe, something inside me started to shift. Not dramatically, not like a movie epiphany, just quietly, like a door creaking open in the back of my mind, letting in light I didn't know I needed. I walked home that evening with a kind of stillness in my chest. It wasn't peace, but it also wasn't panic. It was the beginning of something, and I wasn't sure what. Kate was already home, curled up on the couch, headphones in, staring blankly at her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in, didn't ask where I'd been. I didn't tell her either. That night, I lay awake for hours, not from anxiety this time, but from the weight of finally seeing things clearly. I kept replaying my friend's words. Who's going to pull you out when you fall apart? I realized I had no answer because I had never even asked the question before. I had spent so long showing up for Kate, anticipating her moods, making sure she felt safe and supported, that I'd forgotten to do the same for myself. I thought that was love. Maybe it was, but it wasn't sustainable. Over the next week, I started noticing little things I used to ignore. How Kate no longer picked up after herself. Empty takeout containers, laundry in piles, receipts scattered on the counter. How she spent hours on the phone with her new partner, giggling or whispering as if I wasn't even there. How she no longer made eye contact. Not in anger, not in guilt, just complete disconnection, like I'd become part of the wallpaper. I wasn't angry. That was the strangest part. I wasn't even jealous anymore. I was just done. And then something else happened. I met someone. Her name was Marie. We met at the gym, of all places, when I dropped my water bottle and she made a joke about it. She wasn't stunning or flashy, but there was a calmness about her, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but still pulls you in. We started chatting casually, nothing serious. But I found myself looking forward to those 5-minute conversations more than I had looked forward to anything in months. Marie didn't flirt. She didn't ask about my relationship status. She just talked to me like I mattered, like a person. And I hadn't realized how badly I missed that. Being seen. At home, things kept unraveling. Kate's job performance tanked. She started showing up late, calling in sick, avoiding school altogether. She said she needed a mental reset, so she quit both work and classes without telling me. When I asked what the plan was, she snapped at me, said I was judging her, that I always expected too much. I wanted to scream, not because she was falling apart, but because she didn't see how much I was holding together just to keep us afloat. I was paying the bills, covering the food, cleaning the apartment, pretending like this whole open relationship experiment was still healthy. But inside, I was exhausted. Marie once said something offhanded when I mentioned how chaotic things felt at home. Sometimes we confuse chaos with passion, but one just drains you, the other fills you up. That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep in my brain. And I knew, even if I wasn't ready to admit it out loud, I had already started to let go. By the time fall rolled in, the silence between Kate and me had become its own presence in the apartment. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows a fight or an awkward conversation. It was colder, quieter, more permanent. Like the kind that settles in right before someone moves out. We weren't arguing. We just weren't talking. Conversations, when they happened, were mostly logistical. Rent, groceries, schedules. Sometimes she'd mention something about the guy she was seeing. Ben. I never asked, but she told me anyway. I think in some twisted way, she wanted me to react, but I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I was too tired to keep pretending I was okay with any of it. The hardest part? I still loved her. Or maybe I loved the version of her that existed before all this. The girl who used to dance around the kitchen barefoot. The one who used to trace little shapes on my back while we watched movies. I missed her like she was gone, even though she was still sleeping in the next room. Marie and I were still talking. Still not romantic. Still nothing physical. But she asked about my day. She listened when I spoke. She didn't interrupt or get defensive. She was just there. Fully there. And I was starting to see how rare that actually was. One night I got home late from work. The place was a mess. Takeout boxes everywhere. A faint smell of weed hanging in the air. Kate was passed out on the couch, TV blaring some mindless reality show. Her phone buzzed next to her, Ben's name flashing on the screen. I just stood there staring at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no heartbreak, just emptiness. That was the moment I knew I had crossed a line internally. The kind you don't come back from. I started sleeping at a friend's place a couple nights a week. Told Kate it was for work. She didn't question it. Didn't even look up from her screen. I think part of her already knew what was coming. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Around that time, I got serious about looking for a new apartment. Not to move in with Marie or anyone else. Just for me. A place where I could breathe, think, heal. One evening, I came home to find Kate crying on the floor of the kitchen. No explanation, just tears. I knelt down, gently asked what was wrong. She muttered something about feeling lost, about hating how things turned out. I told her I understood. I did. But when she said, "I still want to marry you someday," I felt my entire body go still. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because that future, the one she was suddenly reaching for, was already gone. The next day, I found a place. One bedroom, nothing fancy. But it had light, quiet, a door I could close. I hadn't officially ended things yet, but everything in me knew it was over. The way you know a storm has passed, not because the rain stops, but because the wind changes direction and you can feel the air shift. I sat in that empty apartment on the first night, surrounded by boxes, and exhaled like I hadn't in years. There was no celebration, no freedom anthem playing in the background, just peace, and the overwhelming urge to sleep, really sleep, for the first time in months. The first few nights in the new place felt surreal. Not in a freeing way, not immediately. It wasn't like I walked out of one life and stepped into a better one. It felt more like waking up in a hotel room you don't remember booking. Unfamiliar, quiet, vaguely disorienting. But the quiet helped. I didn't have to brace for tension, for passive-aggressive silence, or emotional landmines. I could cook what I wanted, watch what I wanted, leave my shoes wherever the hell I pleased. These little things didn't fix everything, but they reminded me what it felt like to just exist without constant pressure. Kate didn't take the news well. When I told her I wasn't renewing the lease and that I'd already moved most of my things out, she just stared at me, blank, like she hadn't actually believed I'd go through with it. She kept saying things like, "So that's it?" Or, "After everything we've been through?" But what she didn't seem to get was, we hadn't been through anything together in a long time. We had drifted so far apart we were just occupying the same space, hoping proximity would disguise the absence of connection. She asked if she could move into the new place with me. I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but from disbelief. I realized then that she really hadn't seen this coming, that she'd built up a version of reality where we were just going through a rough patch, where I'd always be waiting, where I'd keep absorbing the chaos until she was ready. I told her no. I said it as gently as I could, but I was firm. I had to be. She cried, accused me of giving up, then turned the blame toward my friends, said they were poisoning me against her. When I didn't respond the way she wanted, she said some pretty vicious things, threatened to show up at my new place unannounced, said she'd make sure my friends regretted interfering. That was the moment I stopped questioning whether I'd made the right choice. Kate moved in with Ben shortly after. I didn't ask how that went. I didn't need to. But the texts didn't stop. At first they were long and emotional, filled with regret and guilt and confusion. Then came the late-night messages. "I miss you. I hate him. You were right." I didn't respond. I wanted to. At times I even typed out entire replies. But I never hit send, because I knew I wasn't strong enough to reopen that door and not walk through it. And I also knew she hadn't changed. She was just scared, and I couldn't be her rescue mission anymore. Marie and I started spending more time together. Slowly, no pressure. We'd go for walks, grab coffee, talk about nothing and everything. There was no timeline, no expectations. Just space to breathe. It felt safe, honest. Like walking barefoot on warm concrete after months of cold floors. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying someone else's emotional weight. And once that weight was gone, I realized how heavy it had been. Kate still texted occasionally. Updates about Ben. Complaints mostly. Sometimes apologies. I skimmed them, but I didn't respond. I wasn't being cruel. I was just done bleeding for someone who kept cutting herself and handing me the knife. It had been a couple of months since I moved out, and for the first time in what felt like years, my life had a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but there was a steadiness to it. I woke up without dread. I cooked, worked, went to the gym. I was learning how to be alone without being lonely. There was a difference, a big one. Marie had become a consistent presence. Still not officially anything. No labels, no urgency. Just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. We'd go for groceries together and somehow end up talking in the parking lot for an hour. She'd show up at my door with soup when I was sick, and I'd fix the leaky faucet in her place without her asking. It was natural, quietly reliable. And I was starting to realize how rare that kind of connection really was. Meanwhile, the texts from Kate had become more frequent and more desperate. She'd send long rants about Ben, how manipulative he was, how he lied constantly, controlled who she saw, even took money from her. She said he reminded her of her mother, that she felt like a prisoner again, that she didn't know how she ended up here. I wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of me still did. But a bigger part was angry. Not at her pain, but at how she always waited until things collapsed before acknowledging they were broken. She hadn't made any real effort to change. No therapy, no job, no return to school. Just chaos, masked as self-discovery, until it all burned down around her. She asked to meet, just to talk, she said. I told her it wasn't a good idea. That same week, I bumped into her mom at a grocery store. She recognized me immediately, even though we hadn't spoken in years. She looked tired, softer than I remembered. She said she'd been reading about trauma, about how certain parenting styles leave scars, about how she wished she'd done things differently. And then she said something I didn't expect. Kate needs help, but it can't come from you anymore. She has to want it for herself. It hit harder than I thought it would. I told Marie about it later, and she just nodded. Sometimes people confuse comfort with love, she said. But love without responsibility isn't love. It's dependence. That night, I sat in my apartment and realized that for the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for Kate's future. I wasn't thinking about how to fix things or how to shield her from herself. I wasn't rehearsing what I'd say if she begged me to come back. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for her name to light up the screen. I was just living, and it felt like healing. Not dramatic or cinematic, just steady, like the way your breath evens out after a long, painful run. Kate eventually stopped texting. Maybe she sensed the silence, or maybe Ben filled the space again. I don't know. I didn't ask. I had spent years in survival mode, managing someone else's emotions, walking on eggshells, calling it love. But now I had room to grow. I was showing up for myself. And more than anything, I was beginning to understand. Love is not just about how much you give. It's about whether the person on the other side knows how to hold it. I didn't hear from Kate for almost 2 months. The silence wasn't loud. It was welcome. I thought maybe she'd finally settled into whatever life she was chasing. Maybe Ben had become her new constant. Or maybe she'd started to find herself outside of all the chaos. I didn't know. And honestly, I wasn't curious anymore. Then one evening, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Kate. Her voice was quiet, slurred slightly, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. She said Ben had left. Or maybe she left him. It was hard to tell. She said things got dark between them, that she felt like she was losing her mind, that she missed when things were normal. That was the phrase she repeated twice. I just want normal again. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, and didn't call back. Not out of spite, just self-preservation. 2 days later, she showed up outside my apartment. I saw her through the peephole before she even knocked. Hoodie up, arms crossed, pacing like she wasn't sure whether to stay or run. I opened the door because I still had that reflex of being the one who listens, who fixes, who lets people in, literally and metaphorically. She looked tired, not in a surface way, but in a hollowed out kind of way. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there and said, I messed everything up. I didn't disagree. I didn't console her either. I just nodded and said, yeah, you did. She broke down. Right there in the hallway. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her it was going to be okay, because I wasn't sure it would be. Not if she kept living the same patterns, waiting for someone else to carry the consequences. We sat on the stairs outside the building. She talked. I listened. She admitted things I already knew. That Ben had been controlling, that she had ignored every warning sign, that she had no job, no plan, no money, and nowhere else to go. She said she realized too late what we had, that I'd been home, and she burned it down thinking there was something better out there. I didn't say much. I just let her speak. At one point, she asked if we could ever try again. I didn't answer right away. I think I needed a moment to feel the question land. A year ago, I would have clung to it, taken it as proof that I was right all along, that love wins, that she chose me. But now I just saw a person in pain who didn't know how to heal without pulling others down with her. I told her the truth. I didn't hate her. I never had. But I couldn't be part of her story anymore. Not as the fallback, not as the emergency contact. She nodded slowly, like she expected it, but needed to hear it out loud. Then she asked if she could stay with me, just for a few days. I said no, not cruelly, not coldly. Just calmly, she left without drama. Later that week, I heard from a mutual friend that Kate had moved in with her cousin across town, that she was looking for work again, that she finally booked a therapy session. Whether any of it would stick, I didn't know, but it wasn't mine to manage anymore. Marie and I had dinner that night. I told her what happened. She didn't judge. She didn't get jealous. She just reached across the table and said, you finally closed the loop. And she was right. Kate wasn't a chapter anymore. She was the book I finally put down. Not because I didn't care how it ended, but because I knew I couldn't be the one writing it anymore. I didn't expect peace to feel so quiet, not triumphant, not cinematic. just soft, like taking off shoes after a long day, like walking into a space that smells like fresh coffee and your favorite candle. That's how life started to feel after I finally stopped trying to fix something that had already broken beyond repair. Kate stayed out of my life after that last conversation. No more texts, no more calls, no sudden knock at the door. She became a closed tab in my brain. Not forgotten, just not active anymore. I heard she started therapy, got a part-time job at a bookstore, eventually moved into her own place. Maybe it's true, maybe she's healing. I hope she is. But I'm no longer watching from the sidelines. Her progress isn't mine to track. Marie and I, we're good. Better than good, honestly. We took things slow. No pressure, no rushing, and somehow that made everything more real. We built something from the ground up, out of presence, not past wounds. She never tried to save me, never asked me to be anything but who I was, and that kind of safety made me want to become someone stronger. Not for her, but for myself. I started going back to the gym regularly, picked up photography again, something I hadn't touched since my early 20s. I even started cooking more. Real meals, not just frozen leftovers and takeout. Little rituals that reminded me I was building a life, not just surviving one. It took time to stop waiting for the next emotional fire to put out, for the next text, the next guilt trip, the next tug of responsibility for someone else's spiral. But slowly the silence became normal, then welcome, then necessary. And in that silence, I found myself again. Not the version of me who was always holding things together. Not the fixer, the forgiver, the one who stayed up nights wondering where he went wrong, but the version that knew how to say no without flinching, the version that trusted his instincts, the one who understood that love is a partnership, not a rescue mission. I don't think Kate was a bad person. I think she was hurt and lost and searching, but she kept handing me the pieces and asking me to rebuild her. And I kept trying, until I couldn't anymore. Letting go wasn't one moment. It was 100 small ones. Choosing not to text back, choosing not to ask how she was, choosing myself every time the past came knocking. And now I wake up next to someone who brings calm, not chaos. I go to sleep without knots in my stomach. I live in a space that feels like mine, in a body that feels lighter, in a mind that's finally quiet. I don't miss the storm, because this is peace.